Good morning. I am Professor Vishwambhar Prasad Sati, Department of Geography and Resource Management. The topic of my presentation is watershed management. I have divided this topic into several subtopics, and the outlines of my presentations are as follows. I will talk about meaning of watershed, components of watershed, watershed models, highlands and river valleys, watershed boundary, types of watershed, watershed structure and functions, and then I will come into the major topic of major aspect of this presentation, that is watershed management, its scope, objectives and need, new approaches of watershed management, components of watershed management, and watersheds of Mizoram. This will be the last and final slide. So, actually, first we will discuss on meaning of watershed. What is watershed? But before that, I would like to tell you that the watershed has two more synonymous terms. It is also called as catchment or the river basin. So, watershed, catchment and river basins, they are all synonymous terms. You might be known about the basin because when we see the world rivers, we see there are number of river basins like the Ganges basin in India, Sindh basin in India and Pakistan, Brahmaputra basin in India, Bangladesh and China, and then Tarim basin, Hongo basin, there is Congo basin, Amazon basin, and then there is Nile basin, Mississippi basin, Missouri basin. So these are very popular terms. So watershed is not much popular than basin, but because watershed is a new subject of study nowadays, new approach of watershed is one of the most approach for the development of these catchment areas. Actually, there are two terms used for meaning of watershed. One is a geo-hydrological unit, and then it is an enclosed area within a watershed line. So, what is the watershed or its meaning is that watershed is a geo-hydrological unit where all waters comes into a single point through the streams, and it goes to a river, and then it goes continue to its mouth, and it outlet into the oceans or the lakes or the ponds or the bays or other water bodies. So watershed is a geohydrological unit where all waters comes through an enclosed area within a watershed line. And then there are again 2-3 terms. One is the watershed line, another is watershed divide line, other is surface water parting line. So this water parting line, watershed line means the lines divide the water into two watershed regions. I will give you an example of Aizawl city. If you see the Aizawl city from Khatla, Chatlang and Durtlang, there is one long ridge line, and that ridge lines divide the water. Whenever rain is there, that ridge line divides it into two watersheds. One is the Turial watershed towards the eastern part, and the Tolong River watershed towards the western part. So this ridge of Khatla, Chatlang and Durtlang, that is dividing the water. That is called the water divided line or water parting line, and there are lots of other things that are affecting the watershed area. So we will talk about here components of watershed. There are many components of watersheds, but among the major components, we have 5 components here I am discussing, and these components are called life supporting layers. So under the watershed components, we have land, we have forest, we have water, we have soil, we have air. Land is one of the most important components, one of the life supporting system, layer or system, because people interact with the land, people have their own habitations in the land and on the land, and people have livestock has interaction with the settlements are there, and then the people have lots of interaction with the lands. And if there is no land, agricultural land is there, so lots of crops are grown in the agricultural land. So land is one of the most important component of the watershed. Second is the forest. You see, the forest has lots of importance. In a watershed areas where there are lots of forests found, there are the people interactions are more, and the watershed is very healthy. Like the northeastern region, I will give you an example. There are diversities in forest. There are they are very economically viable forests. So they have very greater role in terms of the livelihood enhancement of the people living in the watershed areas. And also forests helps in releasing oxygen and also absorbing carbon dioxide. So in the forest area, lots of carbon sequestration has been taken place. Water is the third component of the watershed and one of the life supporting layer. If water is contaminated, then it is very, very harmful for the human existence, for the life. And if water is pure, then it is very, very healthy for the human existence. So then water should be pure in the watershed area, and then lots of programs are there to make water not contaminated. Soil is another life supporting layer. And what is soil? Soil is the contents after the disintegration of the rocks. And soil increases the fertility of crops. And what happened in the mountain regions, mountain watersheds, the soil is largely eroded, it is being transported, and then it is being deposited into the valley regions. So mountain regions are the most getting most impediments in terms of the soil erosion, and then in terms of low soil fertility. So there is a need to conserve the soil in the mountain regions. And then air is one of the most important life supporting layer. Without it, man cannot be existed. So we understand that in the mountain watersheds, the soil, the air is very, very healthy because there is no pollution. But if we go to the plain areas, the watershed of the in the urban areas, the air is contaminated, so it has the impact on the health conditions of the people. I am giving you some examples of the watershed model, and this model is related to highlands. If you see this picture model, you will find that the highly elevated mountain peaks, they are snow covered, and that is the major source of hydrology, because the snow melting is the major source of river. You can see here many rivers, various rivers are just flowing through the valley regions, and then there are the forest areas, there are the settlements and arable lands, there are degraded lands. So these all are the components of watershed. And one important thing that I want to tell you, that as I talk about the watershed and also the water dividing lines, so you can distinguish watershed and water dividing lines very nicely from this model. There are many water parting lines and several watersheds within this big watershed region. So this is the watershed models for the mountain regions, for the highlands, and this is the valley region watershed. You can see a huge river is flowing, that is called the Alaknanda river, and then in its surrounding area there are a number of watersheds, small watersheds and big watersheds. There are also the components of watersheds, the agricultural land, settlements, forest, and this water parting line you can see, you can see that very clearly. So all these you see the micro watersheds and Also the number of water dividing lines, they are dividing the waters into the two watershed areas. This is a very, very important example of the watershed boundary. Here you can see that one watershed boundary that is dividing the watershed. And that streams has four orders: the first order stream, the second order stream, the third order stream, and the fourth order stream. And then within this macro watershed, you can see there are many micro watersheds and their sub-watersheds also. So there are 8 watersheds, and they have more than maybe 30 watersheds, micro watersheds. So as I told you that macro watershed may have many micro watersheds, and these watersheds are very, very important for this growth of plants and also supporting the human livelihood. So based on area of watershed, the watersheds are divided into 5 types. The big watersheds called macro watersheds having 50,000 hectare land, sub watersheds having 10,000 to 50,000 hectare land, milli watersheds 1,000 to 10,000 hectare land, micro watersheds 100 to 1,000 hectare land, and mini watersheds 1 to 100 hectare land. So these watersheds are divided according to the area they have. So if you see the Ganges watershed is more than 2,400 square kilometer. But if you see the small rivers like Tolang and Turial, they have small watersheds. So we will discuss here the watershed structure. What is watershed structure? So watershed structures include flowing water, that is rivers and streams, still waters, lakes and ponds, and upland areas of watershed. So these are the watershed that including within the watershed, and then one of the structure of the watershed is longitudinal. Longitudinal upstream to downstream. So rivers always flow longitudinally from their origin point to their outlet point. And these longitudinal structures are divided into 3 subdivisions. First is headwater. Headwater means the origin of the river, where the river gets origin, and then it flows. It actually in the originating point of the river having more velocity and volume. So it erodes the soil from its bank, two sides banks. But then this eroded sediments, the river transfer it from the hilly regions to the plain regions, and that is called the transfer zone. Very, very important, because the river transfer the sediments to the plain regions, and where the river transfer these sediments, and that depositional zone is very, very fertile for the cultivation of crops, for agriculture, for horticulture. And this is very, very important zone, because soil is so fertile and production and productivity of crop is very, very high. The second watershed structure is lateral, that is also called latitudinal. So as I told you that river always flow longitudinally. Longitudinally means from its origin to its outlet, but it has some lateral structure also. Lateral structure that across the channel, that spreads across the channel. So floodplains are there. If you see the plain areas during the rainy season, there are floodplains. Means the water is spreading towards its both parts. So it makes the lateral or latitudinal structure. There are hill slopes also and terraces. When you go to the river valleys, you will find both of the sides of the river, there are terraces. They are called lateral or longitudinal, latitudinal watersheds structure. Then also watershed has vertical structure also. Vertical structure when there is rainfall and rain pours from the surface to the interior of the earth, that to the surface water. So that part of the land from where the water is pouring to the as a groundwater, that part is called the vertical structure. Means the vertical structure is an interaction between surface water and groundwater and their interactions. And then there are also temporal structure of watershed also. During the rainy season, when there is landslides, there is mass movement, landslips, or debris flow or flash floods, they make temporal structures. But in due course of due course of time, the temporal structures disappeared. So they are called the temporal structures. Now I will talk about the watershed functions. There are three types of functions of watershed. One is the hydrological function, another is ecological functions, and the third one is meteorological functions. So first one is hydrological function. Hydrology is a science of water that is concerned with the origin, circulation, distribution, and properties of water of the earth. So water, suppose the river is originating from a place, from the mountain areas, and then the water is being distributed through various means, and then its property also, whether water is contaminated or not. That is called the hydrology, and that is a science of hydrology. Watershed has three branches. One is forest hydrology, second is range hydrology, and third is wetland hydrology. And these branches of hydrology, they functions differently. Suppose forest hydrology, when there is a dense forest, so dense forest has the characteristics to store water, more water, and then also pour more water into the groundwater. That is the beauty of this forest hydrology. But in the areas like deserts, where there is no forest areas, so water directly runoffs, and there is also lots of soil erosion. So forest hydrology not only conserves the soil, but also it conserves the water. Another branch of hydrology is called range hydrology. Range means the highly elevated mountain peaks. And then in highly elevated mountain peaks, there is always scarcity of water, because these ranges are not able to absorb water or to conserve water, and water directly runoffs through the different channels or different streams. And third one is wetland hydrology as one of the branch. So wetland hydrology is also very important. We have very many examples of wetland. Wetland means a very big area of water, like Bular Lake in Jammu and Kashmir, like we have Loktal Tal in Manipur Valley. So these are the wetlands, and there are many wetlands in the world, and they are very important because they absorb the water and they contain water for the water crisis time. Second one is ecological function. So ecological function is one of the most important function of the watershed, because all the growth of plants and their developments takes place in watershed areas. So the function of ecological function of water is also to transport the chemicals from one place to another place. And also there is habitat functions, because human settlements are there, livestock rearing is there, and also the agricultural lands are there. So what the human being, they interact with the watershed is that for their livelihood, and they have the interaction with that is called the habitat functions, and that also sometimes that's helping to the growth and development of plants. And on the other hand, sometimes the human interaction with the ecology or with the watersheds are very harmful, because they destroy the watershed areas. And third one is the ecological succession. Ecological succession means the growth and development of plant in a particular area. So there are different watersheds have different characteristics. They have different characteristics in terms of that some watersheds are wet and humid, some watersheds are very dry and hot watersheds, and then accordingly the ecological successions vary from one watershed to another watershed. This is the most important function of watershed, and then it is called meteorological functions. It is also called the hydrological cycle, or it is also called a water cycle. So under this meteorological function, the first one is precipitation. In many forms, precipitation may be in a rain, as snow, as fog interception. So rain falls and then it runoffs through channels, through streams, or through major rivers. It is maybe surface runoff, or it may be subsurface runoff. And then it is stored in the lakes, in the ponds, in the seas, or in the oceans. So precipitation is there, runoff is there, and storage is there. And then lastly, the evaporation. So evaporation is very, very important function, meteorological functions of watershed. Evaporation means there are three types of evaporation. One is soil evaporation, and soil evaporation is called evapotranspiration. When there is rain, soil absorbs the rainwater, but immediately after, when there is solar radiation falling, making the soil heat up, and then water droplets convert into the water vapors, and water vapors are low volume, and then due to the gravitation power, the water vapors rises up, and then again it converts into the water droplets, and then there is raining. So that is the evapotranspiration. Second one is plants. Evaporation by plants is called transpiration, and that transpiration means the plants absorb water through its roots, and they releases water through its plants, the leaves. And actually, when there is sun rays falling in the plant leaves, there is then a process of photosynthesis, release of oxygen, and release of the water into the water vapor, and then it is called transpiration. The last one is surface, water surface, or evaporation, or it is called the evaporation. What is evaporation? Evaporation is when the solar radiation directly falls on the water bodies, on the oceans, on the lakes, on the ponds, and then the upper layer of water heats up, and then water droplets convert into the water vapor, rises up due to the gravitation power of the earth, and when they rises up in the high altitude, temperature is less, there is condensation process, and due to the condensation process, the water droplets convert into the water vapors, and then there is raining. So this whole function is called meteorological functions. Then we will talk about the benefits of healthy watershed. Healthy watershed has three benefits mainly. One is ecological health. So when healthy watershed is, ecology is very healthy. You see, I will give you an example. In the desert area, the watershed is not healthy. It is dry, no plants, no animals are there. So the ecological conditions of these watersheds are not healthy. But in the mountain areas, we have example of Northeast India. Here the watershed is very healthy. The quality of watershed is very high, so that the ecological health of the watershed is very, very high. Diversity in plants or animals, so that is called biodiversity hotspot also. So when watershed is healthy, it is also the economy is also healthy, because the people living in the watershed areas have they are dependent on the watershed resources for fodder, fuel wood, for food also. There are lots of wild food available in the watershed areas. So, and then the areas, the countries where watershed is very rich, they are economically very rich also. I can give you an example of this subpolar region, the Taiga region, subboreal forest are found in Canada, northern part, Alaska, northern part of Alaska, and also northern part of Siberia. So the watersheds are very healthy. These trees are very economically viable, so that the economy of these regions are very, very rich. And you can see lots of plywood are being exported from these countries. Even India is one of the importer. And then the benefit of a healthy watershed, last one is the human health. When watershed is healthy, so human health is also, human beings are very healthy. I will give you an example that the Mizoram and also the neighboring country Assam, because the watershed is very healthy in Mizoram, so that the health conditions are very good of the people living. But if you go to the Silchar, there are lots of problems. There are health hazards. There are also this problem of asthmatic problem. People are suffering from asthmatic. But in Aizawl, there is no problem of asthmatic or no other airborne diseases. So airborne diseases are more prone into the areas where watershed is not healthy. So this was the first part of my presentation. I am coming for the second part, that is called watershed management. And then question is here, what is watershed management? It is a process of guiding and organizing land and other resources, because watershed resources are very important, and there are number of watershed resources found in watershed areas, and they are all are in depleting, because human population is increasing, lots of forest depletion, lots of landscape degradation, environmental degradation is there. So that the watershed management is a process to guiding them and organizing the land and other resources. Use of watershed resources without affecting adversely soil and water resources, because as I told you, soil and water resources are important resources of the watershed, and there are lots of problems coming, lots of land degradation, lots of water contamination, lots of soil erosion. So that watershed management is a use of watershed resources without affecting them adversely. Watershed is adaptive, comprehensive, integrated multi-resource management planning. So it is adaptive, it is a comprehensive, and it is an integral multi-resource management planning also, because management planning is there in the watershed management. You see that multi-resources means there are lots of resources, and then to make a management planning is the main objective of this watershed management. It seeks to balance healthy ecological, economic and cultural social conditions within a watershed, because watershed is not only ecology, it is also important for economy or also for social cultural conditions, because the human settlements, human habitats are located in the ecological areas. So they have the interaction with ecological aspect or ecological resources for their economic advancement. So then there must be a balance to make all healthy, the ecology, the economy and socio-cultural conditions. And it serves to integrate planning for land and watershed water. So also the watershed has to integrate planning for land and water, the two important components. I will discuss now about the scope of watershed management. The scope of watershed management is to balance between utilization and conservation of natural resources in a watershed. So a sustainable utilization and conservation of all the natural resources management, natural resources in a watershed is the scope of watershed management. The second one is the sustainable approach for resource conservation. So not only resource management, but resource conservation is one of the very comprehensive terms, and then it is one of the most important scope of watershed through sustainable approach. Objectives of watershed management. There are many objectives of watershed management, but for your kind information, I am only discussing 4 major objectives of watershed management. The major objectives are to protect and conserve the land, forest and water. One of the most important objectives of the watershed management is to protect, to conserve the land, forest and water. To check soil erosion, because lots of soil erosion is being taken place due to the number of human activities. So the watershed management objective is to check soil erosion. Third one is to rehabilitate the degraded land. Land degradation is there, forest depletion is there, because due to the lots of human interaction with landscape and forest resources, to rehabilitate them. I can give you an example of the shifting cultivation of Northeast India. You see that the shifting cultivation is practiced in the forest area. And then nowadays, because shifting cultivation has a fallow cycle and the people are not adopting this fallow cycle, many shifting cultivation plots are abandoned and they are degraded. There is no reuse of the land for agriculture, nor they are using for regeneration of land, so they are degraded. So the watershed management has the objective to rehabilitate all areas which are degraded in the watershed areas and to enhance the groundwater recharge. Water is very precise resource, but it is receding. There is lots of scarcity in the watershed areas because increasing population has more use of the water, and then there is water contamination due to the pollution. So this watershed management has the objective to enhance the groundwater so that the drinking water can supply properly, and also to protect the water from the contamination. What are the needs of watershed management? That is one of the very, very important questions. The watershed management has the need because it sustains life through life supporting layers, the land, water and air, because most of the rich watershed areas having a rich land, water and air, and they are sustaining life. It enhancing livelihoods. Food, fodder and fuel are very abundantly found. Mainly the communities which are located in the forest area, dense forest area, the remote area, the developing and developed countries, the people developing and underdeveloped countries, the people living there, they are fully dependent on food, fodder and fuel. So that is the requirement of watershed management. The need of watershed management is to protect surface water and enhance the level of groundwater, because water is now being a major problem for the world countries at the local level or at the global level. Actually, watershed is not a new, but there are new approaches for watershed management. Now, recently was required because lots of problem the watersheds are facing. So, to reduce these problems, there are new approaches of watershed management has been implemented by the governments and by the developing agencies. So, among the new approaches, one of the approaches is part of local socio-economic development processes. So, in the watershed areas, there is socio-economic development processes because the watershed resources are largely utilized for the livelihood of the people. Those are the poor people. And also, there are lots of forest depletions that the forest products are using for industries. multi-stakeholders participation. What happened actually during the past, that only the government agencies or the development agencies are the main stakeholders. They are participating in watershed management. But local people were debarred. While local people have a lots of knowledge to conserve the watershed. So now new approaches of watershed management has the major approach is to multi-stakeholder participation. Local governance process. The planners are sitting in the plain areas, and also they are making planning for the mountain areas, for watershed areas, and they don't have much knowledge about the areas. That is one of the very, very big problem. So the governance should be handed over to the local people. That's why they can participate and they can conserve the watershed management. One of the new approach is focus on upstream downstream linkages. The problem is that the upstream watersheds are supplier, downstream watersheds are receiver. Downstream watershed people living there are very rich, and upstream watershed people are very poor. Because I will give you an example of Tolang River is originating from the south part of Shetship district and flowing through Aizawl, and then it is outletting into the Brahmaputra in Kachar region. So every year thousands of tons of soil erosion is done by the Tolang River, and it is deposited in the Kachar region. And Kachar region is very fertile, and in the upstream area of Tolang River, that is Mizoram, there is no soil fertility. Production is very low, productivity is very low, and then the downstream people are enjoying. So the main focus of this new approach is to linkage them. So the output the downstream people are receiving from the supplying from the upstream, they have to share this. This is called the ecological services payment. That's why the upstream people can get their livelihood sustainably. Fourth one is dialogue between the local and scientific knowledge. Sometimes we are using scientific knowledge, sometimes we are using the local knowledge, local wisdom, but independently if we are using them, they are not sustainable. So what we have to do, we have to use the traditional knowledge as well as the scientific knowledge together. Then the watershed management can be done sustainably. And then last one is sustainable use of watershed resources without any conflict. So you see that there are watershed areas conflict for water use. Internationally, nationally, we have China-India conflict on Brahmaputra, China-Pakistan conflict on the river Sindh, Bangladesh-India conflict on Brahmaputra, Mekong conflict on the South Asian countries. We have within India the Kaveri river conflict, the Ganga river conflict between the Bihar and between the West Bengal, Kaveri conflict between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. There are many conflicts. So the new approaches of watershed management is to sustainable use of watershed resources without any conflict. So the all people can use the water without any problem. And watershed management components. They are ecological components because all fauna, flora, and also the landscape, water, air, everything comes under the water ecological components. Social components, human being, animals, their interaction with the natural environment. This comes, their settlements, their cow sheds, agriculture fields, they all comes under the social components. And economic components means the economic development, the industrial development, the construction of hydropower projects, the construction of roads in the watershed areas. So all these watershed management components are very, very important, and they are very important for the human survivals also. And this is the last slide. I will just talk about the major watersheds of Mizoram. Mizoram has mainly the three watersheds you can see in the figure first. First watershed is that the river flowing towards the north. Second watershed is the rivers flowing towards the west in the Bangladesh. And third watershed is the rivers flowing towards the south in the Myanmar area. And if you see, they are macro watershed of Mizoram. But if you see the micro watershed, there are thousands of micro watershed in Mizoram. And they have their own importance. They are distinct socio-ecological, economic, and cultural identity of these watersheds, macro and meso. And I thank you very much for your kind attention.